Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, as if in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Foreign Relations be discharged from further consideration and that the Senate now proceed to S-Res 224. Further, that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that motions to reconsider be considered and made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, allow me to say things as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. I oppose this measure, and like everyone on this floor, we all want the conflict in Gaza to end as quickly as possible. The reality is that Hamas has the ability to do so right now by releasing all the hostages and immediately laying down their weapons. Let me say that again. We can have a ceasefire immediately, but it takes Hamas to do it. Hamas refuses to do so. Hamas has the duty to do this. They started this. The entity that started this needs to end it, and they can end it by simply stopping fighting and releasing the hostages. They refuse to do that and continue constant attacks. They have the duty to start this ceasefire. One of the things that this measure does that I object to vehemently is the fact that it does not underscore the fact that all of this is the fault of Hamas. Every starvation, every injury, every death, every single thing that happens in this conflict is the fault of Hamas. On October 7th, when this invasion by Hamas started, Israel was doing nothing to deserve this. Instead, Hamas invaded the country. They killed 1,200 people. They took 251 hostage. And if that wasn't enough, the torture that they did on that day was horrific. For those of you who haven't seen the film of what they did, I strongly recommend you don't look at it because you won't sleep. It is inhuman what Hamas did to the Israeli people. The Israeli people believe they have to defend themselves and they have to eliminate Hamas. Worse, Hamas has used previous pauses in humanitarian aid convoys to resupply their attacks at the expense of the Palestinian people, to include looting at gunpoint the majority of the trucks that crossed into Gaza. This is pure evil. They show pictures of women and children starving. Those women and children are starving. They're not being starved by Israel. They are being starved by Hamas. The Hamas fighters you will see in the photography are well-fed, well taken care of, and they steal the food that's supposed to go in there and go to the women and children that are not fighting. This resolution fails to even mention this threat from Hamas, much less recognize the terrorism as the root cause of this conflict. Additionally, we should be very cautious against getting ahead of the negotiations of both our president and our democratic ally, Israel, who are working diligently to resolve this conflict. In fact, the administration has worked with Israel to establish a new system of aid distribution that prevents diversions by terrorists. More aid was delivered into Gaza last month than in almost any other month of the past year. There is no blockade. Food is getting in, Hamas is stealing it. And what they steal, they either eat or they sell. This resolution is incomplete, it is misleading, and unfortunately, it is partisan. For these reasons, I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President, I thank the gentleman from Idaho, the chair of our Foreign Relations Committee. I join him enthusiastically in condemning the actions of Hamas, the invasion on October 7th of Israel and the slaughter of 1,200 innocent people, the taking of hostages, and the infliction of suffering that Hamas has inflicted on Palestinians within Gaza. But the situation is much different today than it was a few years ago. And 4 months ago, I stood here and I asked for unanimous consent and support of a Senate resolution on the humanitarian disaster in Gaza. The resolution called for an end to the siege, an end to the war, and the return of the hostages. Since then, more than 400 people have died of starvation, including more than 100 children. And that is ongoing and accelerating. And thousands more have died under bombs in bullets at aid sites themselves. And at the time, I held up this picture of Jinan Iskafi. She died in her parents' arms, the victim of a military blockade on infant formula. Here joining Jinan are children suffering from famine conditions that exist right now, this month. Amir, Marianne, Sham. There is an ongoing famine in Gaza. And the Netanyahu government has made a self-conscious decision to deny people the food and medicine they need to survive. Women waiting for C-sections are trapped in the middle of a bombing campaign. Children are forced to watch their mothers die slowly of cancer with no access to medicine, and the hospitals they need are being destroyed. And at the same time, the Netanyahu government has begun a new military operation to take complete control of Gaza City. In Gaza City's hungry civilians are living under nonstop bombardment, and it is about destroying buildings that are left standing. And it's a bombing campaign that has part of its objective to force them to leave. Netanyahu and officials in his government acknowledge that they want people to move out. They acknowledge that their campaign is in significant part about displacing people who live in Gaza City and forcing them to move elsewhere. And that is at a time when those folks are living in tents, the kids aren't going to school, where they've already moved 6 or 7 times, and where the decision a family has to make is horrific. Do they move to another place where there is no place to go, and they have no guarantee of any kind of safety, or is it better for them and their family to stay where they are and risk that they'll be in the path of the bombing campaign? You know, the definition of international terrorism in our law, Title 18, Section 2331, includes violent actions that are intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population. And what is coercion and intimidation more than bombing where people live? You know, Mr. President, 46 senators co-sponsored this simple resolution months ago, and it's about trying to bring an end to this relentless and needless suffering. We must act. We must act so that an innocent son or daughter risking starvation does not starve. We must act to save someone's mother or father from a bomb dropped in Gaza into a place that is already unlivable. And we have to act as a body to do everything we can to end this war. Now, the objection that my colleague made is about Hamas stealing food. And there's no doubt Hamas is stealing food. They care nothing about the Palestinians living under their oppression. But there's also no doubt that the Israeli government self-consciously has restricted the aid that is necessary to get in, has interfered with organizations that were delivering aid, and it's resulting in an extension of the suffering. You know, Mr. President, wars are terrible, not always avoidable. But after the horrors of World War II, we had, as part of the international community, the Geneva Conventions, and it stated that collective punishment is a war crime. Militaries would not be any longer allowed to use food as a weapon in order to press a battlefield advantage. And war may not be avoidable, but those waging war have limits on what they can do in waging even a just war. So this is not just about Gaza. If we relinquish our commitment to the Geneva Conventions, we reopen society's acceptance of anything goes in causing the suffering of innocents to achieve some military advantage. We do not want to go there. You know, my colleagues have also objected to the declarations of famine, even though that is the declaration that experts, and I say experts, it's people who have as their goal in life's work to try to feed people who are desperately in need of nutrition. You know, in order to hold the children and not suffering, we'd have to completely discount the consensus of every humanitarian expert and agency in the world. The organizations that, in many cases, were founded with the significant help of bipartisan efforts here in this United States Congress. I'm talking about the World Food Program, about UNICEF, about the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, about Mercy Corps, about Doctors Without Borders. All of these organizations have documented the devastating starvation. So this is not a question of whether there is starvation or there isn't. And yes, there can be fault, as the chairman indicated, with Hamas and the role they play, and I condemn that. But there's a significant actor here, and that's the Netanyahu government. When they barred aid trucks from going in, that leads to hunger, starvation, malnutrition, and lack of medicine for people who desperately need it. You know, I do want to thank folks who are continuing their efforts to do anything they can to help feed these starving kids in Gaza. The Catholic Relief Services, Refugees International, and Friends Committee, Mercy Corps, Oxfam, and Amnesty International, Med Global, Human Rights Watch, Norwegian Refugee Council, HIAS, CARE, and the dozens of faith-based organizations for being here and always being available to brief members of Congress, but more importantly, to get food to folks who desperately need it. You know, Mr. President, this resolution is going to be rejected today with the objection presented by the chairman. But from my perspective, we can't reject the facts, because the facts won't be rejected in the history books. Kids and innocent Palestinians are starving. We've seen enough to know that right now, Prime Minister Netanyahu is leading a policy of mass forced displacement. People are going from one place to another with whatever it is they can carry on their backs or in their arms. When they go to one place, they are displaced yet again. And there's active discussion about having all of the Palestinians out of Gaza itself. They're being pushed by starvation, by bombing, and by shelling. That, in addition to the restriction on aid that has been imposed by the Netanyahu government, is shocking. We know that the Netanyahu government's rules of engagement, and by the way, using American bombs that are used in ways that have grossly disproportionate civilian casualties. Over 64,000 people in Gaza already killed, many women and children. Nearly 20,000 children are dead. Some experts define these actions as ethnic cleansing. Others suggest it's genocide. And that includes, by the way, many Israeli experts, former intelligence and military officials in organizations, B'Tselem, Physicians for Human Rights Israel, Combatants for Peace. They have said that what they see is genocide. You know, there are many labels that could apply to what is happening in Gaza today. In whatever label is used, a war crime or crimes against humanity or ethnic cleansing or genocide, one thing is clear: this must end. It's not about just giving a name or a label. It is about saving lives. And the United States has a unique role because of the close relationship our country has had to Israel and the close relationship that our president has to Prime Minister Netanyahu. And what matters most is the actions we all take to make this suffering end. And that can end with a secure and democratic state of Israel. But it also must acknowledge that what is occurring has to stop because so many innocent people are victims of these bombs, of this starvation, of this forced displacement. The Senate today can demand an end. And Mr. President, I hope my colleagues will join me in passing this resolution. I yield back.